Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, it is I am the one and only Coco Bandicoot here, and I am back for the likes of the Maxi Toys videos once again. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back for some more of Let's Play of Klonoa Phantasy Reverie series while we're still playing through Klonoa 2, Lunatea's Veil for the PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Xbox One, Xbox Series X/S, PC Steam, and of course the Nintendo Switch. So, last time, we've essentially did manage to fully begin playing through Klonoa 2, Lunatea's Veil, but this time on modern systems, as you probably already expect. And right from the start though, is about the fact that not only we did somehow explore through not only one, but 3 other levels. So, likely for instance, about the fact that we did somehow explore 2 platforming levels, as well as the first boss fight. So overall, it was actually self-explanatory, and it's also ridiculously easy as well. But eventually later on though, the game will get a lot more challenging, and especially notable that, like I said before, the majority of the stages coming up is also going to be extremely lengthy as well, due to the forms of the structure of the forms of the entire adventure. So because of that though, yeah, today for this video is about the fact that we can able to continue things on and head on straight into the forms of the next location, and because of that, we're going to be going to Joilant Plaza, which as a result, after all, we're about the fact that we've already technically rang the first bell, or specifically we somehow got the first bell element, so exponentially we're able to find the second element bell somewhere in journey forms of Joilant Plaza, as I stated as earlier. So either way though, and as you can tell, it basically takes place in some sort of like an amusement carnival park setting, which I will admit though right away is about the fact that this place looks kind of cool to me though, especially no matter what though, is about the fact that we can able to actually just to see some cool attractions here and there, ranging from roller coasters and all that stuff, and it looks like out of nowhere, Tad did somehow stole one of our elements, so yeah, we definitely need to retrieve it back. Although, relatively speaking though, is about the fact that exponentially though, we have to go through 2 levels respectively. So because of that though, meaning about the fact that as you can tell, Tad is probably gonna do something a little bit more stingy as far as I'm aware, which yes, she did somehow split into 2 halves, which is one of them it appears to be like a black or blue color, and one of them as white color. So yeah, we definitely need to able to try to go after these 2 in those 2 levels respectively, and yeah, not much else to say about that I guess. So anyways, a few things we want to explain for this point today while this is happening is that today's date of course is the 14th of March today, in some cases in 2024 today. Now, as far as I'm aware, is about the fact that out of nowhere, that we actually got ourselves some even more news and discussions we'd like to point things out right from the start as well. Although we'll explain more about that if we continue proceedings for this for the most part. So either way, so yeah, as you can tell, as I said earlier, we must retrieve that particular element back from the likes of Tad. So in some cases though, it's about the fact that we can able to go into Jungle Slider or Joilant Fun Park. So I believe normally on the PlayStation 2 version, as far as what Ray the Flying Squirrel has already pointed out, he did somehow tackle through Joilant Fun Park first, and then afterwards though he did tackle through Jungle Slider. In this remastered this time around though, we'll go for a complete opposite route. So because of that, I'm going to be going into Jungle Slider first, and then we'll go into Joilant Fun Park later on. So that'll be a part of a plan, exponentially speaking now, and let's hop in straight into the forms of Jungle Slider. In some cases, one of the first levels in the game to able to feature this very cool hoverboard segment. So because of that, I could imagine about the fact that, well, imagine if Klonoa would become a mod for Sonic Riders, Sonic Riders Zero Gravity, and even especially noticeable with Sonic Free Riders. Well, again, I would have imagined if that would be the case for the sake of the forms of modding those games in particular, but it might be very complicated, especially noticeable in Sonic Free Riders though, just because of the Kinect control scheme. So And yes, Klonoa doesn't know how to swim because obviously he's a cat after all, so obviously about the fact that he's allergic to water, similar to Sonic the Hedgehog. Except that unlike Sonic the Hedgehog though, that basically Sonic can enter underwater, but he does have a short amount of time for breathing in the underwater. So at least that's what I was expecting for this point, especially how air bubbles decides able to come in. So either way, as to be expected, much like the forms of how it does on the PlayStation 2 version of this game right here, Klonoa 2, Lunatea's Veil, as well as the forms of a couple of segments like this, and not only in Klonoa Empire of Dreams, as well as the forms of Klonoa 2, Dream Champ Tournament, where basically those about the fact that everything else is completely autopilot, except the fact that if you dare miss any of those specific crystals, there is no way you can able to back up a little. So you have to force to able to continuously going forward, so just in case you can able to just, you know, try to able to avoid a lot of hazards and all that stuff. So that's pretty much as far as I was expecting. So, and also I just realized about something is that after I have experienced the original PlayStation 2 version of Klonoa 2, Lunatea's Veil, and while going back onto the original PlayStation 2 version, after I've experienced a remastered version of this, as it turns out, I fully appreciate about the forms of the quality of life improvements in regards to the forms of that particular piece, as far as I was able to get at one point, that we can able to actually just try to get one of those dolls in particular. Well, I'm very grateful, because if I somehow, well, there was that particular level coming up, which I'm sure we'll explain more about it, and during at some point until on next Tuesday sometime, because like I said earlier, it's about the fact that today's date, of course, there is the 14th of March today, in some cases in 2024 today, and we are getting pretty close to the halfway point in terms of the forms of March in 2024, before we move on to April. And something worth noting for is about the fact that we've only just got about 2 weeks left now for specifically the UK version of Kung Fu Panda 4 is going to be releasing on the cinema screen, so I'm still pretty excited for it. And on top of all that stuff though, is about the fact that, well, exponentially speaking though, is that out of nowhere, in the actual context, for the sake of the forms of gaming announcements and everything else like that, well, you remember guys about the fact that ever since on Tuesday, that I was very excited about the forms of Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door is now finally coming onto the Nintendo Switch, during at some point on the 23rd of May. As it turns out, we're about to be getting yet another game that's also going to be releasing on May, along the same lines as they're not only Endless Ocean Luminous, but it's also with any other games as well. Well, as it turns out, is about the fact that it looks like that My Little Pony Generation 5 universe is about to be getting yet another video game adaptation during at some point also in May. So it feels like no matter what though, is about the fact that it feels like that the entire My Little Pony Generation 5 video games always seems able to came out during the forms of like a 2-year gap or anything else like that. So, I digress. So, either way, let's grab that piece right here, and thankfully I don't have to, like, do a sacrifice technique right here, because I'm pretty sure we all settled in for the sake of the forms of trying to able to get certain pieces for the doll, and of course we'll go after Tat right here for the sake of the forms of the final section of this particular stage. So obviously no matter what though, we need to chase after this blue variant right here, so we can pretty much expect to know about the fact that, of course, since that we've entered in the forms of this stage as opposed to Joilant Fun Park, so this means about the fact that we might be able to actually easily get tricked by the forms of one of those two variants of Tat, at least as far as I'm usually concerned with. So, anyway though, as far as what I mentioned this earlier, is about the fact that, well, exponentially speaking though, we're about to be getting yet another My Little Pony game at some point in May this year, specifically the 17th of May to be exact, so that's going to be on Friday, presumably speaking. So as it turns out, is about the fact that there's a game called My Little Pony, the Sapphire Heights Mystery, and as a result, for I've seen the announcement trailer, as well as the gameplay footage of the game itself, it plays very similar to the forms of how it does it as in the forms of being a Maritime Bay adventure, although there are some quite a few differences this time around. For one, you now have the ability to able to choose whatever characters you want to switch to or play as a matter of fact, aside from the fact that, well, there might be still some mini games to play, but they are very identical to the forms of how it does it on the Maritime Bay adventure. Like, you can still able to actually, like, fly through rings and herd up specific animals, and on top of that, trying to jump over obstacles and all that stuff, including a dance minigame as to be expected. But as far as I do realize right from the start this time around is that there is now Misty decides able to join in the actual crew this time, and in addition to that, Sparky the baby dragon is also going to appear on that game, which as a result, yeah, I still basically give up on the forms of G5 hope for. But that's just mainly because I just still think that G4 is the best generation in my opinion, just because of all that world building and all that stuff. And I get the strong sense of feeling about the fact that since that we've already got the game, that it did manage to take place in journey forms of sometime in Maritime Bay, and until the next game is going to roll around, it's going to take place the entirety of Zephyr Heights. And something tells me until 2026, mind you about the fact that by that time until 2026 roll around, that Nintendo is going to be able to release the next console during that specific period, that we might able to expect to get the My Little Pony game takes place in Bridalwood or something like that. Well, it's difficult to tell at this point, because as far as I'm aware, we've only just got the actual trailer announcement for that specific period. So, and of course, just like the ones how it does it in the Maritime Bay adventure, not only is it going to be releasing on the Nintendo Switch, but also on Xbox One, Xbox Series X/S, and on top of that with the forms of the PlayStation 4, and even PC as well. But this time around though, it's also going to be including the PlayStation 5 version. So, and I'm surprised that no one else actually talks about this, is that out of nowhere, back in 2022 sometime, specifically in, I would say in September sometime in 2022, where basically the PlayStation 5 version of a Maritime Bay adventure did somehow exist during that time. So, yeah, that's a little bit weird. And I think I did somehow manage to able to look upon the actual gameplay footage of the likes of the Maritime Bay Adventure game on the PlayStation 5 version. The only major differences between the other versions of the game is that the frame rate is actually a lot better this time around on the PlayStation 5 version. Like, it runs at 60 frames per second as opposed to 30. So, gee, no wonder why the PlayStation 5 gets a lot more superior for the sake of the forms of the graphics and all that stuff. Although, usually relatively speaking though, despite the fact I still haven't got the game though, because, I mean, let's face it though, I just simply don't care about the forms of G5 stuff anymore. I mean, don't get me wrong, the movie is good to me though, but it's just that this series itself just feels a bit all over the place. Like, for instance, I was very disappointed with the forms of Make Your Mark series as a matter of fact, because obviously with this disappointing cliffhanger, and on top of that, the actual series has been concluded during that specific time. Yeah, I'm not joking, what I'm saying is that Make Your Mark did somehow end it with a cliffhanger, despite the fact that the series has been ended since in November 2023. So yes, one of those random villains to somehow manage able to go through the portal is the final ending, Get Screwed Up, Make Your Mark. So yeah, I'm just a little bit baffled about it, especially noticeable with the animation quality as well, and also with the forms of the lack of world building, which, as a result, the only world building set pieces it does contain for G5, which is, I think there was only a grand total of like, oh I don't know, 6 world building set pieces, or technically 7 for the sake of the forms of that particular, let's just say, Secrets of Starlight special. But aside from that, I just think that the world building in G5 is rather lacking. Like, it is interesting, don't get me wrong, but it's just about the fact that it's nowhere near as grand as the forms of how it does it for G4 in my opinion, because to me, G4 is much more superior in terms of the forms of the world building, ranging from Ponyville, Sweet Apple Acres, in addition with the forms of Changeling's Kingdom, and even especially noticeable with the forms of Sea Equestria, and also with the forms of Canterlot and the Crystal Empire, as well as the forms of Appaloosa, and especially noticeable with the forms of anything else for that I can probably think about. Oh, and also with the forms of Everfree Forest. So, and that's what makes the actual, Main Haddon as well, because obviously that's what makes G4 so special to not only for certain Brony community, but it's also with the forms of how the fact that it has a lot of emphasis on fantasy stuff, and on top of that, just has a lot of adventures that's been going on, and even it does have some interesting villains aside from the, G5 only contains like a grand total of like maybe 3 villains, or technically 2, because technically Sprout did somehow reformed as the forms of one of those other secondary characters or somewhat. Well, mind you about the fact that I simply couldn't be bothered able to go back onto making Mark series right now, just because, you know, the series is dull and I do not enjoy it anymore. Like, obviously it just feels wrong on so many levels. I mean, interesting for sure, but it's just about the fact that I just simply got bored of it. And that's the reason why I tend to enjoy Sonic Prime a lot more, just because despite the fact that it's pretty short in some parts, and also the writing feels a bit kind of forced sometimes, but I will admit though, the animation looks a bit top-notch in Sonic Prime, and it's also worth noting for is that yes, every single actor does contain some familiar actors from the Friendship is Magic lineup, so yeah, that's the reason why I'm able to enjoy Sonic Prime a lot more than any forms of how it does it for My Little Pony Make Your Mark, to me anyway. So at least I'm still a brony still, but I'm usually more referring to the Friendship is Magic portion, just because obviously the world building is actually a lot more interesting, and on top of that, the dialogue is actually very memorable in the G4 variation, because I don't know about you, for G5's dialogue, it just feels a bit too simplified. So because of that though, yeah, I just don't find the actual dialogue in G5 all that memorable to me. Well, I'm biased, I guess, as far as I'm aware. So, also I just realized about the fact that the next level we on to right now, this particular level is going to be pretty lengthy, because we have to go through so many segments, especially noticeable about the fact that obviously you have to go through several circus tents, and on top of that, there's going to be a lot of emphasis on puzzle solving sometimes, and something tells me we are on the halfway point of this entire stage, although usually, relatively speaking, we have to chase after this white colored variation of Tad right now, so we can pretty much expect able to get that particular element for reals this time. So because of that though, without any sort of hesitations, so everything else will be come to expect. So, but anywho though, something's worth noting for as well is that what I've heard that Cap King 74, he's almost getting very close towards the end of Kingdom Hearts 2, specifically Kingdom Hearts 2 Final Mix, for the sake of the Let's Play department, and I'm pretty sure no matter what though, he's on to the forms of the final world in the game, which appears to be the world that never was. I'm pretty sure that's what it says anyway. Well, mind you, it's been quite some time since I actually have last played Kingdom Hearts 2, not only for the PlayStation 2, but also on PlayStation 3, and even on PlayStation 4, because no matter what though, I'm only just managed able to go back into Kingdom Hearts 2 quite an amount of times for the sake of my nostalgia memories and all that stuff, but that's besides the point. So, and it looks like we're now entering into this little spooky place as far as I'm usually concerned. So, relatively speaking, I was about the fact that we must make our way to able to actually just trying to get the heck out of this creepy environment as far as I'm usually aware of. So, but yeah, it looks like Lolo did somehow become scared when it comes to like something creepy is going on. So, oh yeah, let's get to the forms of another topic at this point throughout, is that, well, after that, is that it looks like, no matter what though, about the fact that, in terms of the forms of that particular new My Little Pony game, as I mentioned this earlier, it looks like that yet again, that Outright Games is once again gonna be a developer for the sake of the forms of that game again. So generally speaking, though, it's about the fact that, as I said this before, the entire gameplay itself plays very identical to the forms of how it does it for the previous game, which appears to be, as I said, this countless amount of times, which is of course a mere time-based adventure. The only major differences this time around, though, is that for one, as I said this earlier, you can now able to switch between multiple characters on the fly, ranging from Sunny, Star Scout, alongside with Izzy, Hitch, and as well as Zip, and even Izzy, and most notably, Misty, which as a result, I'm pretty sure that Misty is now a part of the forms of the actual main 6 crew now, like a proper main 6, as we're hoping to attempt to. Well, despite the fact that, relatively speaking now, I found Misty is an alright character to me, despite with the forms of the lack of narrative and all that stuff sometimes. Well, usually for the sake of clarity, I just think that she's pretty adorable, at least for what I've noticed that anyway. I'm sure that Crash Bandicoot wouldn't mind about the forms of Misty. Well, that might be besides the point on his part, because obviously he's still thinking about Tawna, because obviously Crash still misses Tawna so much. So, despite the fact that we've already bumped into her during the forms of whatever Entropy was actually planning at, as well as the forms of, well, Dr. Neo Cortex or anything else like that, well, let's not get into that particular point, because still, it's very weird about the fact that the Switch release of Crash Team Rumble has still not addressed so far, which is especially noticeable concerning the fact that it might be too late now when it comes to the forms of the Switch release of Crash Team Crash Team Rumble right now, just because all the content is pretty much ended. So because of that though, meaning about the fact that it's kind of unfortunate we're not going to be able to see some weird, obscure characters in the forms of the playable department, and on top of that with the forms of just any other like stages or anything else like that. I mean, that's as far as I can try and able to explain any of those things. So, but yeah, aside from all that stuff though, is about the fact that, as I mentioned this before, the mini games of the new My Little Pony game is basically identical to the previous game, although the noticeable difference is of course, Misty is now going to be part of the forms of the mini games variety. I'm pretty sure that Sprout is going to be taking off, or to be more specifically, Sprout is basically got replaced by Misty, I'm pretty sure, just because no matter what though, Misty is now going to be a part of the main cast, at least as far as I'm usually concerned of, and on top of that, usually 5 saw the gameplay footage as well. The UI has been updated into 3D character renders as opposed to 2D character renders for the artwork and everything when it comes to the UI and all that stuff. And finally, most notably, is that during the overworld gameplay, there is actually now 2-player co-op. So I'm guessing that's the only thing we can probably think about. So generally speaking, I was about the fact that my expectations is still rather low, especially noticeable because obviously that game is going to be targeted towards kids. So pretty standard stuff for the most part, especially noticeable that just like a mere time-based adventure, if you own the Nintendo Switch version, obviously you can play the game on the go once that particular game decides to come out during at some point in, like I said before, until the 17th of May. So, which reminds me about the fact that that's going to be roughly about 6 days before Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door on Switch will be releasing during that time. So, yeah, it's pretty crazy, kind of think about it. Okay, let's get to the forms of another topic at this point, and that's what appears to be about the fact that out of nowhere as well, that Monster Hunter Stories 1, specifically the Nintendo Switch version, is that it also confirms the actual release date too. So yeah, it doesn't take that long to able to actually get those specific release dates sorted out. And as a matter of fact, it's that Monster Hunter Stories 1 is going to be arriving on not only on Nintendo Switch, but also on PC and PlayStation 4 as well, until June 14th. So yeah, that's roughly the exactly same day, as in Inside Out 2 is going to be releasing around the same day as well. And generally speaking though, that's also going to be roughly about 13 days before Luigi's Mansion 2 HD is going to be releasing during that specific point as well. So Anyway, so we've pretty much made our way towards the end of this stage, and one last thing before we get on to another topic at this point is that I'm guessing about the fact that with this next My Little Pony game, on the PlayStation 5 version, if I'm assuming so anyway, it's also going to be on 60 frames per second, unlike the any other versions, was pretty much going to have to be 30 frames per second, I'm pretty sure. Well, we shall see what happens until that game decides to come out. Well, mind you, I'm probably not going to get the game anyway, just because at this point in time, I'm still very excited for Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door, after all, for its remake and everything. So, but I'm still really hoping about the fact that maybe they'll add in some more content for the likes of the forms of that particular game in mind. So, either way. So, yeah, we somehow got our element back, so thankfully we don't need to worry about the forms of Tat anytime soon. And as a matter of fact, though, it's about the fact that exponentially we can able to get ourselves our next element. So, but here's the thing, though, we might able to come across into a boss fight coming up, so it will be too easy for the sake of convenience, and yeah, that's what I can really say about it. Apologize for my commentary, it's a little bit slightly awkward sometimes, because I'm afraid to tell you, is that during later on, in March, that I'm afraid to tell you about the fact that the actual news and discussions alike will be basically become a little bit more streamlined more than anything, because no matter what though, we still have no idea when does ND World is going to take place. But hopefully by that time until probably sometime in Journey forms have been either recently or next week, then obviously we will find out more about it if that particular ND World presentation is going to take place during at some point, possibly by the forms of well, again, we'll have to wait and see what happens. So, also I just realized about the fact that this particular boss coming up is about the fact that obviously no matter what though, it's going to be pretty easy to deal with. Although mind you, no matter what though, it's pretty weird for this particular boss design for the sake of that particular weird thing right here. But I'm sure we'll kick his butt no problem, so as we expected we'll go for 2 phases, just like the first boss. So, anyway though, also I just realized about the fact that one of those games in particular called Chrono Cross, which is basically a sequel to Chrono Trigger or something like that, well, as it turns out recently, that Chrono Cross has officially became 25 years old since 1999. So, yeah, time flies, you know? Especially, I have heard about that game already, but I've never actually experienced it for myself, because no matter what though, it's really disgustingly expensive, what I've heard, for the sake of the forms of the physical version of Chrono Cross, and thus I've already heard about the forms of Chrono Trigger already, because as far as I'm aware, there is technically the DS version of Chrono Trigger. Well, besides the fact about the fact that it plays pretty similar to the Super Nintendo counterparts, except the newest addition being is that they obviously feature the anime cutscenes and stuff like that, which that's as far as I can probably think about it, because mind you, I did somehow saw some brief moments in Journey Forms of a Checker Convoy's playthrough of Chrono Trigger for specifically the DS version, I'm pretty assuming so, because unlike the Super Nintendo version, it is really extortionately expensive for the cartridge version. Well, at least if I'm assuming so anyway though, but either way. And also, not to mention though, is about the fact that recently, I just found out that Kung Fu Panda 4 was currently onto $80 million for its box office earnings. So that's actually pretty good stuff. And unfortunately though, there's our first death in Journey Forms of Klonoa 2. Lunatea's failed, because trust me, what I'm saying is that until in the later stages to come, the game is going to get a lot more challenging than the forms of how it does on the first game in my opinion, just because of multiple factors. For one, certain obstacles will attempt to makes things a little bit more difficult, and in addition to that though, is about the fact that I've noticed about the fact that the wind bullets range is actually a lot smaller compared to the forms of how it does in the first game. Although, to be fair though, this is still on normal mode, so, and exponentially speaking though, if I would have to guess, that's similar to the forms of Door to Phantasy. Once you beat the game once though, you're able to actually get the third unlockable difficulty, which appears to be hard. So, and I'm pretty sure on hard mode, plays pretty much exactly the same, except the fact that obviously it does manage to take place in well, Klonoa 2, Lunatea's Veil. So, in either way, the second boss is pretty much done, despite the fact that I wasn't expecting to able to get that particular death earlier, but that's just mainly because it has been quite some time since actually I've last played this in Journey forms of not only the original PlayStation 2 version, but it's also with the remastered version as well, for the Phantasy Reverie series, so, but I digress either. So, oh yeah, I should also mention about this as well, is that, yeah, remember about the fact that when, I believe Maxi did somehow mention about this briefly, about the forms of the Oscar-winning nominations recently? Well, as far as I'm aware, Operama is currently the third highest grossing Best Picture winner at the Oscars, just behind Titanic and Return of the King, in specifically The Lord of the Rings. So, yeah, it was pretty darn close, but at least it did pretty dang well, in regards to the forms of Operama. In fact, no matter what though, maybe at some point, for what I've heard anyway, at some point in April, maybe me and my brother Crash Bandicoot were able to actually give that film a chance, because no matter what though, I have heard some good things about it though, like some of the most impressive visual effects and anything else to be more specifically. So yeah, I might as well give that film a bit of a chance or what have you, and then if I do somehow enjoy it, then maybe it's a possibility I can probably get the film on DVD at some point. Well, it's difficult to tell at this point, and what the heck is up with you, Lolo, that you did somehow let go of that particular element? Well, she did pick it up off screen, but that's okay, because obviously no matter what though, Joilant is basically completely done, well, aside from the fact that I was missing a couple of crystals. But honestly folks, it's just about the fact that they're just there for the sake of, not only for its bragging rights, but for what I've heard anyway, is that if you gather all 150 crystals, or jewels for that matter, you might get something very rewarding, which as a result you get one of those, you know, as I said this before, you get one of those illustrations for your scrapbook, which again, I will try my best if I was able to accomplish that, but I will say it is extremely difficult able to do so, because no matter what though, I have managed able to complete some levels with it on my other save file, but that might be besides the point. So, oh yeah, and also another thing I want to mention about this as well is that it's been 19 years ago since Blue Sky Studios' film called Robots did somehow became a thing. So yeah, until around that time, until 2025 roll around, obviously Robots will eventually gonna became 20 until next year. Gee, time flies. Although, mind you, I've heard about the film already, but I haven't exactly experienced it completely. But I do know for the fact that Robin Williams is actually a part of the forms of voicing one of those characters, which, you know, who also did Genie from Aladdin, as well as the forms of Mrs. Doubtfire from the likes of the live-action movie, and on top of all that stuff though, with any other like films in general, at least as far as I'm aware. So even then though, and as you can tell, we somehow meet up with this menu right here, which obviously we can't do anything right now, just because no matter what though, the adventure is just not over just yet, because obviously, since that we've now got ourselves the second element with us, so this means about the fact that we must go back in here, and exponentially we're all able to actually know what's the next destination we're about to head off to next. And exponentially speaking, we can able to hopefully try to get ourselves the third element, which as a result, it might be somewhere into west, somewhere in the west, because after all, we've already experienced somewhere in the east with the forms of Sea of Tears, and we've already explored into the north portion of this entire environment, and also we've already experienced somewhere in the south, and exponentially we can now go into somewhere in the west. So at least according to the forms of what I've noticed on the actual destination graph, or anything else like that. So, and yeah, as I said this before, that's as far as I can try and able to explain any of these things right now. And I suppose the final thing I want to mention about before this particular section has been finished, I've noticed there are some more screenshots that's been added for the likes of the Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door Switch remake. For that screenshots has been recently been revealed, thanks to the forms of the Japanese website, which as a result, it's probably best if we let Maxie will mention more about it if he goes back onto Silver Story in Sonic the Hedgehog 2006, so just in case he can able to actually explain things clearly. So yeah, that's usually it's something. And it looks like, yep, we're going to be able to explore this particular city right here. So because of that though, and that is where the third element is going to be able to take place, I wonder. So, and I'm pretty sure no matter what though, if we look up on the forms of the actual play data right here, so far we've somehow rescued 4 dolls so far. So naturally speaking, we're now on to the first quarter done for the sake of the forms of trying to rescue every single dolls. So either way, and suffice to say, it's about the fact that I was expecting to try to able to investigate in here, but it's probably best if we save that up and doing at some point until next Tuesday. So because of that, speaking of which, I think suffice to say, we should probably end things off this point right here. So join me next time for more of Let's Play of Klonoa Phantasy Reverie series for Klonoa 2. Lunatea's Veil is that we're about to investigate in Volk Hall. So, and able to actually just to discover the third element with the third bell. So, yeah, I'll see you guys until next Tuesday. Later, fellas.